All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me into your home this afternoon.
That's a pleasure.
Nice to see you again. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about assistive living technology and how technology has helped you to become independent,
Okay.
keep your independence, and maybe for the future, any adaptations that you might use in the future. But could you just start off by introducing you, telling me a little bit more about yourself?
Okay, I'm Kevin Donellan. I'm age 55 and I was affected by the drug thalidomide, which was a drug given to pregnant women in the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s. And my mother took two tablets. And depending on what stage the baby was in the womb, depended on the severity of the impairment. So as I say, she only took two tablets, so it was really quite a potent drug, which affected me being born without arms and legs, basically.
Right. And I know you've been telling me quite a bit about your story this afternoon, but can you just tell me briefly how you grew up, how it affected you growing up?
Yeah, I was born into a large family. I had five siblings, and I was the second youngest. I've got a younger sister who wasn't affected because it's not genetic. I had a really happy childhood, to be honest. It was my parents who were fighting the lawyers and trying to
Mm.
get the compensation, and it was my parents who were fighting to get me to mainstream school and things like that.
Right.
And thankfully, my mother did fight to get me into a mainstream school, so I wasn't really institutionalised. I went to the special school till I was about seven,
Right.
and then I went to a mainstream junior school,
Yeah.
and I think that's made all the difference in terms of where I am now.
Because you've been mixing with able-bodied students and classmates.
Yeah,
Did you have able-bodied friends and
absolutely.
yeah?
And it was never an issue for me growing up. It was kind of like that wasn't on the front of my mind being disabled. I never considered myself being as disabled because I had like non-disabled friends, etc. So it was never an issue.
Yeah.
And my parents encouraged me to be as independent as possible. Well,
Mm.
when I was younger, anyway, especially when my father was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
But he died when I was 14, and then my mother became more protective.
Yes.
And then I had to battle with her to basically leave home and fight for my independence all over again.
You said to me that you'd gone to mainstream school and then
Right.
eventually you moved out to be independent. Were you 21, 22 when
22,
you
yeah.
started to live alone for the very first
Yeah.
time? So how was that? Was it in a assisted accommodation or were you a regular flat? How did you live by yourself?
Well, initially I was working for social services, and it came to a head when I was around with my stepfather, who I didn't get on with, and I was battling with my mother as well in terms of living independently.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Friday afternoon, and I said to the senior social worker, "You've got to find me somewhere to live."
Mm-hmm.
And the Lennon Cheshire home, which was the local institution, was full. So he said, and this is 1979, 1980, he said, "How do you feel about living with the mentally handicapped?" And I knew nothing about
Mm.
learning disability at the
Mm.
time. And I was shocked, but I was so determined to leave home.
Mm.
I lived in a hostel for the mentally handicapped, as it was called,
Right.
for 6 months.
Right.
But it turned out it was brilliant because I lived in the staff quarters, and I had like my own flat, and they had a male care worker assigned to help me, with dressing and things.
Right.
But during those 6 months that I lived there, I basically taught myself how to cook basic things. I had a
Mm-hmm.
small portable stove.
Mm-hmm.
I experimented with like coat hangers for zips and things like that.
Right.
Social services at that time, I have to say, weren't really supportive because I'm talking historically,
Mm-hmm.
but in those days, independent living wasn't really talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and they were encouraging me to stay with my mother.
Right.
The senior social worker said, "Your mother's a good cook. You should stay at home." And the OT came to visit me, and even she said, "Oh dear, how do you think you'll manage?" And she left me like a wooden stick with a wire hook, and walked out. And I didn't know what the hell that was. I thought,
Right. Was it a back
a nose
scratcher or
picker or a
something?
back scratcher. And it turned out it was a button hook, and that was the only kind of help I got really.
Was it assumed that your mum would be the lifetime carer then?
I think it was assumed that I would be back
Or
home
you would
within
need
weeks.
care, yeah.
I think they assumed that I would give up and go back home. And my mother, she said, "Oh, he'll be back home in 6 weeks," and she never spoke to me for a whole year because she couldn't get it out of her head that her little baby had fled
Yeah.
the nest, even though I was 22. So anyway, after a couple of months of living in the hostel, I got a flat with a housing association locally where I lived,
Right.
And the bloke who lived in the flat, he had no legs and he died. So it was partly adapted anyway.
Right.
I was fairly limited in terms of adaptations because it was rented. They were reluctant to rip the place apart and put adaptations in. For example, I didn't have a low sink. I had a normal sink at normal height. So my friends just screwed two taps in the pipes underneath and had like a bucket.
Really?
So I'd because I get round on the floor mostly in the home.
Right.
So I'd hop on my bum to the taps under the sink and duck my head.
So you made your own adaptations.
Yeah,
and...
so it's very sort of piecemeal and my own sort of variations really.
Yeah.
It was only when I bought my own flat about 8 years later that I could adapt it the way I wanted to because it was my own property.
So how old were you roughly when you had your own property? And you...
roughly I was about 32. And it was the large Victorian house and I had the whole of the ground floor. And even the front doors were separate, so I was able to modify the front door so it was automatic, so it could come in automatically, and I was able to have low sinks, all the light switches were low down and things like that. I've still kind of use those kind of adaptations now in my own home now.
So what would you say your major needs now? Your mobility and washing and dressing and sort of things? What do you need help with?
Yeah, the mobility is the main one, getting, especially when I go out the house. But within the home, I still require some assistance. I mean, I can dress myself in a fashion. I can undress myself quite easily, but getting dressed can be awkward with some items of clothing. Right. Say if I'm going to an important meeting, I have to wear a jacket, or certainly can't manage ties. I never wear ties unless I really have to. Yeah. If it was a job interview or something. Yeah. Things like shampooing my hair because I can't really top it all. I haven't got much hair left now, but that used to be problematic. Combing my hair and shampooing it when I had hair. That kind of thing. So I do need some kind of assistance. And I'm actually married now. We've got 2 gorgeous children. I became a dad at the grand age of 49.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so I've got a 6-year-old daughter, and we've got a 5-month-old baby boy.
And they're Daisy and
Oliver.
Oliver.
Yeah, got one of each. So, but I always sort of made sure that when I first met Angela, that she wouldn't be my carer, she was my lover, and I wanted to keep those roles separate. I mean, Angela loves me and she does care for me, and she'll do anything for me, but I kept on the male PA that I employed. I kept him on, and I'm currently looking for a replacement male PA to help me with the personal care. And also Angela does enough with the kids anyway, running the household.
A busy home life.
Yeah. So but for most of my adult life, I lived independently as a carefree bachelor with no responsibilities whatsoever. So
you're a family man now, and you're a dad.
Things have changed quite dramatically. And also, this home that I'm living in has got a lot more space, so I can actually drive the wheelchair around the house. So I'm a bit lazier as well. I'm not on the floor as much as I used to be. I still go on the floor, but not as much as I used to.
Is that because it's quicker or it's less painful on your back?
It's quicker, but also I do suffer with back pain. For example, when I'm on the floor, I've got to lean against something like the sofa or the radiator. I can't just sit in the middle of the floor because I get real bad backache. And that could be a throwback to the artificial legs that I wore, the prosthetics, which were not like the fabulous prosthetics you get now. The prosthetics were like really old-fashioned and really, really heavy and pretty useless, to be honest. Because if I fell over, I'd just like smash my face or have stitches on the back of my head. I was knocked unconscious the first time when I was 5. In the special school, I was pushed over. But I gave them up when I was about 13, 14. But I still get backache as a result of those legs, really.
So since then, you've used a wheelchair?
Yeah.
Or you've gone round yourself on your bottom?
But also, as I'm getting older, I get more aches and pains, and I'm not as healthy as I used to be. For example, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with diabetes, and I also have kidney problems. I have recurring kidney stones, and I had to have an operation for the last lot of kidney stones because they had like pointy bits on the end of them, and they couldn't be blasted. They had to be surgically removed. So lithotripsy didn't work. And while I was in hospital, they diagnosed me with sleep apnea. So of a night time, I have a mask.
Oh, right.
Because when they measured it, my breathing, apparently I stopped breathing. I think it was 58 times a minute.
Oh, gosh.
So I was virtually not breathing throughout most of the time I was asleep.
No.
That's the one thing I can't do for myself. Angela has to put the sleep mask on me.
Right.
I can take it off, but I can't put it on, so that's a bit of a
So you
pain.
do need some personal assistance still, whether
Yeah.
that's paid or
Yeah.
through Angela, your wife. So could you describe your home to me?
Okay.
Physically,
Yes.
the levels, and what does it look like?
We moved into this house 3 years ago, largely because Daisy came along. I mean, the flat would have been ideal for just the two of us, but it wasn't big enough.
Yes.
So we found this place, and it's a lot more spacious than the flat, but I still need a lot of adaptations, so I can do things for myself rather than Angela doing it.
Yes.
So, for example, I've got an automatic front door. I've got low light switches, which are about 18 inches off the ground,
Right.
because I do get round on the floor.
Yes.
I've got low sinks in the bathroom, and Angela's got a regular height sink for her, so like his and her sinks. I've got an electric lift that lifts me from the floor to the height of the wheelchair and the height of the toilet.
Right.
The toilet is it's a specialist loo, and it's called the Closomat. And basically, it's like a super powered bidet, only 10 times more powerful.
Right.
It basically washes your bum, and then a hot air dry comes up automatically.
Right.
So it washes and dries your bum, and it's brilliant.
Yes.
And the water's warm as well.
Sounds
And
lovely.
it's about, I mean, it's like a luxury, but for me, it's essential because it's about dignity.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've had one since I was about 12, and it's a real passion killer if you have to have your partner wiping your bum. And that was always problematic.
Well, it is a worry and a concern, isn't it?
Yeah.
And without that, you wouldn't have your dignity. would you?
Exactly.
Or somebody would have to help you.
And in the past, when I had partners, I hated going away. Yeah. Sometimes we'd go away for the weekends, and basically I wouldn't eat anything, and so I didn't have to use the loo.
Yes.
Because that's the last thing I would want a partner to do. I mean, Angela would be quite happy to do that, and she has done when we've been away and stuff. She was quite happy to do that. And she's worked with disabled people before me, and she was also a qualified nursery nurse, so she's used to wiping bums, and she said, "Oh, don't be silly."
But as you say, it's the relationship between you as a partner, not a carer.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of my big fears, as I get older, then I'll become less dependent. Or I'll become more dependent, rather.
Yeah.
I'll become less independent.
Yes.
And that's my biggest fear of getting old, really. And Angela said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll look after you." But, it's still at the back of my mind, really. And that might be less sort of physically mobile to get around and transfer it onto different seats and things.
Right. Now, you mentioned your bathroom before, and you kindly showed me the area before. Can you tell me a little bit more about your bath and the main equipment that you use on a daily basis?
Okay. For most of my adult life, I've just used the shower. In the flat, it was just a shower. And I used to love soaking in the bath when I was a kid. It was like amazing. But I've actually got a bath now that I can get in and out of myself. It's got a lift, like a solid lift, and it's on like this hydraulic pole.
Right.
And you just press 2 buttons in and out, and it literally lifts me over the sides of the bath and then down to the floor.
Right.
And it lifts me from the floor up and over and into the water.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. And it's been brilliant. I spend hours in the bath just soaking or reading a book. Just relaxing, yeah. And because I can get in it myself,
Have you ever had any difficulties in using it?
It has broken down once, but thankfully I wasn't in it. I was about to use it and the lift stopped working. It was an electrical problem. But I've actually got in the bath when my wife's been out. And she went and I said, "What if you'd have got stuck?"
Yes.
But I've always taken risks in my life, because if I'd never taken risks, I probably, wouldn't have had the life that I've had. Well, I know I wouldn't have had the life I've had. Do you know what I mean? So
from that point of view, that you're independent, you can bathe independently.
Yeah.
Now, you were telling me that the social service didn't provide that bath. That was through a private company, or a charity.
Well, because it's such a specialist equipment, it's not something that social services would normally provide, because they'd say, well, you can use a shower, so it wouldn't be a priority.
Right.
So it is kind of a luxury item in that sense. But because of thalidomide, and there's a thalidomide trust fund set up, I was able to get a grant off them, or a loan rather, a loan from them to buy the house and also to adapt it, rather than waiting for like 18 months plus from social services. And also, as I say, there's some things they would provide, but other things they wouldn't.
Right.
I mean, to be fair, I got a grant from social services when I moved into my flat, and they did do a lot of adaptations in the flat. For example, the lift that lifts me from the floor to the chair, they put one in, but I was able to buy 3 of those in this house. So you know,
you've got more choice in different rooms.
And I do appreciate the cost of these things are extortionate, and because you're disabled, you know, the manufacturers put increased costs. You know, if I get me van adapters, you get ripped off really with the adaptations because they're essential. So I do appreciate that not many disabled people could afford some of the adaptations that I've got. But obviously simple things like low light switches, you know, doesn't really cost that much. It's just, you know.
But allows you to have choice and control over lights and...
Yeah, and when we bought the house, it was in a bit of a ramshackle state and it needed complete rewiring. So we needed new light switches put in anyway, so that really didn't cost extra than what we would have paid.
Yeah, it was ideal. You could design your own rooms and the
exactly,
layout.
yeah.
Yes.
And because it's completely my own and it's detached, I can basically do what I want with it. Because even when I bought the flat, well, even when I bought the flat, I still had a neighbour upstairs, so I was still limited in terms of, like, you know, we shared the driveway and things like that. So the ramp was problematic in front of the flat. You know, it had to go down the side of the flat rather than straight out from the front door.
What you really needed.
Yeah, but we don't have any shared driveways here, so it's good.
No. So can I ask you then, how were you assessed? How were your needs assessed? Who literally did that? Was it social services, or was it a nurse, or your GP?
Well, I'm talking historically.
Or did you see to yourself?
Well, I'm talking historically, but I've never really been assessed for my needs. Because I just had to get on with it when I left home. And I had to fight the authorities basically to live independently.
So you have found out, you've looked for equipment and things yourself.
Even the Thalidomide Trust weren't very forthcoming about equipment. It was left to my own devices. But peer support is very important. So other disabled people, and particularly other thalidomiders, they've told me about equipment, and Facebook has been a godsend.
I was going to say, do you communicate through the computer? And
well, before Facebook, we didn't really communicate with each other. But now I'm in touch with other thalidomides, even all around the world, even, and you know, they've used equipment, and we have like a forum, and we share ideas. You know, anything that comes out in the market that they've tried, and if it's any good, and things like that.
Yeah. Like a personal recommendation of what works.
Yeah. I mean, I have to confess, the kitchen's not adapted, but we are going to change the kitchen next year. So half of the kitchen will be a workspace for me to...
You can practice your cooking again.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds good.
But I am able to make a cup of tea because I've got a low sink in the kitchen, and I've got one of those, you know, instant hot water and cold water machines that you just press a button and boiling hot water comes out, so I don't have to mess with kettles. But my wife's a good cook. Isn't that terrible? Yeah. But I mean, my wife sometimes goes to visit her in-laws in Wales, and I'm on my own every weekend. So some weekends I do literally live independently. But my PA will come in then and help me. And also I've got family who live nearby.
Do you have a PA visit every day, or just
yes.
when you need?
Well, every weekday, Monday to Friday. I don't bother with weekend help. But as I say, it's more to give Angela a break really, rather than
some
you know.
Respite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, as your adaptations stand now, do you think there'd be any improvements you could make, or is anything on your wish list that you'd still like?
Well, we're doing the kitchen next year. But this is a dormer bungalow, which means we've got stairs, and we've got 3 rooms upstairs and a bathroom upstairs. Yeah. And I've only been upstairs once, and that's when my nephew carried me up. Right. He does weightlifting, and I'm far too heavy to be carried, and I don't want to be carried. No. So, long term, I mean, it's not essential at the moment, but long term, as the kids grow up, they might move upstairs, and I'd like access to upstairs. So, on the wish list is some form of lift. Yes. I don't really want a stair lift because it's not practical, especially if I'm using the wheelchair. But some kind of lift that'll take me and the chair upstairs. Lift. Yeah, a vertical lift. Yeah.
So at the moment, the children sleep downstairs.
They do. Yeah.
The living area's downstairs.
Yeah, because they're so young, so we're all downstairs. Yes. But it's kind of like a wasted space upstairs, really. It's only when, you know, the in-laws visit and the relatives, they stay up there. Yeah. But it'd be nice to have access to all the house, really, because it's kind of a wasted space.
Sure.
But I think, I mean, I've no intentions of leaving this house, and my wife's happy to stay here forever.
Well.
So this is like, my final lifelong house, really.
Yes.